Advanced Heroquest. Gaming aids. Ghosts. Be whole, be dust, be dream, be wind, be night, be dark, be wish, be mind. Now slip, now slide, now move unseen. Above, beneath, betwixt, between. Ghosts have ever been in the background of Warhammer Fantasy, much as they are in our own real-world folklore and myths. But it was not until the advent of the second edition of Age of Sigmar that a full range came into being, tying together and expanding upon the ethereal units and models that had been a feature of first the old undead and then the Vampire Count's army for numerous editions. When Advanced Heroquest came out in 3rd edition, there were already rules for both spectres, ghosts, and wraiths in the bestiary of the main rulebook, and rules for making an entire ethereal army in the Warhammer Armies supplement as part of the undead list. But it was very much a niche part of the game, little explored and even less supported. However, I think it is time that changed. In this video, we present a full set of rules for using ghosts in Advanced Heroquest based on the contemporaneous rules in Warhammer Fantasy Battle at the time of Advanced Heroquest's release. Ghosts will have some very unique rules and definitely offer an interesting challenge to any party of heroes. Once again, I have produced monster stats and rules reference cards to accompany this video that are available for anyone to both download and use for free. For transparency, this is the process I went through. Let us begin with the base stats. I began by converting over bravery, which equals cool, and then intelligence, which equals intelligence. In this case, 5 and 5 respectively. To generate wounds, you simply add 2 to the Warhammer Fantasy Battle profile, and thus this gave us 5. Next, I calculated the speed. This is done by adding the movement stat to the initiative. This gave 7. To calculate the toughness, you add 2 to the original stat. This gave us another 5. Next up is strength. Normally you generate this by adding 2, but in 3rd edition, Ghosts had a strength of 0, and so I chose to preserve this for reasons that you will see later. Again, the same logic applies to bow skill. Normally, to calculate bow skill, you simply add +2 to the original Warhammer stat line, but again, Ghosts had 0, so I once more kept this. Weapon skill is simply calculated by adding +3 to the stat value, giving us again 5. This would normally make them fairly easy to damage, but not so with ghosts, as you'll soon see. Now, normally, what weapon a monster uses, cross-referenced with their strength, affects the amount of damage that they inflict. But ghosts had a special rule in Warhammer Fantasy that stated that they cannot inflict physical damage, which I have again implemented in Advanced Heroquest, and so this point is mute. The points value for a ghost in Warhammer was a whopping 50 points. This puts it in the 9 points bracket in Advanced Heroquest, which may seem a bit pricey. Especially for a weapon skill 5, 0 strength monster that can't hurt the heroes. But it is in their special rules that their true worth comes. Let us begin with Withering Fear. During a combat turn, if, at the end of a player or GM phase, a hero or henchman is adjacent to a model with the Withering Fear rule, it loses a point of bravery. If a hero or henchman loses all of their bravery, they die, or become knocked out if they are a hero. If a knocked out hero has its bravery become less than 0, it dies. Any model that dies in this way transforms into a ghost. At the beginning of a combat end phase, heroes and henchmen return their bravery to their starting value. Now, it is worth mentioning that ghosts cannot inflict physical damage, but this rule means that their mere presence causes Withering Fear in the living and is effectively a ticking time bomb for the heroes. But it is not something that cannot be diffused. For at the beginning of the end phase, heroes and henchmen return their bravery to their starting value. But do not forget that an end phase only occurs once a combat phase has been ended, either by the heroes escaping or defeating all of the monsters. Ghosts also have 2 rules from the Advanced Heroquest rulebook. One is the invulnerable rule, and the second is the regeneration rule, to represent their ethereal nature. Regeneration. A monster with regeneration recovers 1 lost wound at the beginning of each GM phase of every combat turn. Invulnerable. When rolling damage dice for a monster with the invulnerable rule, dice which score equal to or greater than the monster's toughness can only be counted if there is at least 1 12 rolled. Magical weapons are unaffected by this rule. To complete the special rules for ghosts, I have concocted a new rule called Ethereal Flight. A monster with ethereal flight ignores all death zones when they move. They may move diagonally and move through walls and doors as if they did not exist into explored dungeon areas. Unexplored dungeon areas cannot be entered in this way. This rule is based on the original flight rule, which gives creatures the ability to ignore all death zones when they move. Ethereal flight, though, also gives them the ability to move diagonally, as well as move through walls and doors into explored dungeon areas to chase down any fleeing heroes or henchmen. However, please make note of the last line. Ghosts cannot enter unexplored dungeon areas. Exploring is a job for the living, not the dead. The combination of these rules means that if a party of heroes encounter a ghost, they really only have 2 options: fight or flight. If a party attacks, they must hope that they get lucky with their to wound rolls, as the ghost has the invulnerable rule before the ghost saps away both their bravery and then their lives. However, if the heroes decide to flee, then they have to hope to get out of sight of the ghost as quick as possible, which will be tricky as ghosts can pass through walls and doors to get to the heroes. It is worth mentioning though that ghosts cannot see through doors and walls. This does allow for the heroes to get out of sight and thus evade them. In order to make all of these new rules digestible, here is an example encounter that we played out. Heinrich Lewin and 3 henchmen find a door that leads to a lair. The GM and the player roll off for the surprise roll to see who places the monsters. The GM loses, selects a ghost, and Heinrich's player places it. The GM then moves it 1 square to be just at the edge of Heinrich's charge range. Heinrich, unperturbed by the supernatural apparition, stomps forward, his sword held high. He reaches the ghost and swings. He rolls an 11 and easily finds his mark. Heinrich then rolls 4 damage dice to see if he wounds his opponent. This is where things get tricky. Ghosts have the invulnerable rule, meaning that Heinrich will need to roll at least 1 12. If he doesn't, none of his dice will count, even if they beat the toughness of the ghost, a modest 5. Alas! Heinrich fails to get a critical, meaning his 3 successful 2 wound rolls are ignored. Next, the three henchmen enter, but none of them have enough speed to reach the ghost and then attack. And, due to the ghost's Withering Fear rule, they opt not to run to surround the model. And, speaking of which, this now comes into play. At the end of the hero phase, any hero or henchman adjacent to a model with the Withering Fear rule loses a point of bravery. It's worth mentioning here that this does stack in case of multiple models. So, for example, if a hero is adjacent to 2 models with this rule, they will lose 2 points of bravery. In this case, Heinrich's base stat bravery of 8 became 7, indicated by a die. Subsequent to this play testing, we made some counters to track the bravery of each hero and henchman, which are available to download. Next was the GM phase. The ghost used its ethereal flight to sidestep and position itself adjacent to the 3 henchmen. Ghosts cannot attack the living, unlike spectres and wraiths, but its mere presence causes each to lose a pip of bravery, taking each down to 6. It was now the turn of the 3 henchmen to retaliate. The first swung with his blade, requiring a 5 to hit. He got a 9 and then rolled 4 damage dice. Unfortunately, he too failed to roll a 12, and so none of the dice were counted. The second henchman attacked, getting an 11 and striking the ghost, and when he rolled the damage dice, the elusive 12 made its appearance. This meant that not only did the man-at-arms get to roll an additional damage dice, but any damage die equal to or greater than the ghost's toughness will cause a wound. With the extra roll, he inflicted 4 wounds on the apparition. It was now the turn of the last henchman to attack. But alas, he simply missed, rolling a 2. This left only Heinrich, but he couldn't reach the ghost unless he ran. His player did not think that prudent though, and instead moved to be closer but wisely stayed out of the Withering Fear aura of the ghost. At the start of the GM phase, the ghost's regeneration rule kicked in and it gained a wound back. It then moved to be adjacent to both Heinrich and a henchman, intent on picking off a point of bravery from each at the end of the GM phase, which it duly did. It was now the hero's turn. Heinrich began by lashing out at the ghost, but rolled a 1, a fumble. Normally, this would gift the attacked monster a free attack, but as ghosts cannot inflict damage on the living, nothing happens. However, heroes and henchmen can either move and attack, or attack and move during the combat phase, and, as such, Heinrich wisely moved out of the ghost's Withering Fear aura before the end of the phase came. Next to act was the adjacent man-at-arms. His attack is successful with an 8, and he then rolled an elusive 12 to wound. This, coupled with the other damage dice he rolled, are enough to knock the last 2 wounds off the ghost. This ends the combat phase. All the Withering Fear markers are now removed. And speaking of markers, as I mentioned earlier, I have created a sheet of markers to use to keep track of Withering Fear in lieu of dice, which can, as you can see, clutter up the combat space a little. These markers can simply be placed beneath the base of each model to keep track of how much bravery they've remaining. That seems the simplest option to me. Anyway, with all that, the rules are complete. Perhaps this ghost may seem underpowered or perhaps overpriced to some GMs, but I feel it is a very useful utility piece in dealing with parties of heroes who have significantly leveled up. The ghost is best used as a combination piece alongside regular monsters. Target the hero or henchman with the lowest bravery, tie up the other heroes with the other monsters, and then use the ghost to wither away the bravery of the target. The ghost will also draw attacks away from your other monsters and eventually kill off one of the party, creating another ghost. If the heroes get a lucky hit in, move the ghost out of danger to regenerate its wounds. If you have accrued any ambush counters, it's worth saving these for an encounter with a ghost to increase the number of threats. Just a couple of last notes to finish with. Fate points. It's worth noting that fate points can normally be used by heroes to negate all the damage suffered by an attack, effectively creating unbeatable parties of veteran heroes in a long campaign. Ghosts bypass this, so if you want to once more challenge a powerful party in a particular expedition, a ghost or two can be a useful part of the equation. Anyway, for ease of use, I have turned all of these rules into bespoke reference cards, and there is a link to download it in this video's description. It has a back, so simply print off the sheet, fold it in half, and glue. We also laminate our cards. If you try this monster out in your games, we'd love to hear from you and how they do, and any stories. Enjoy.